Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Outside the Box video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one I wanted to do before I start working again on the Cryptids and Monsters sides because I'm having a blast with regards to this series. It's a lot of fun to focus on these characters, these obscure characters from certain popular movies, and then B, it seems like it's getting a good number of views. My last one involving Nedry from Jurassic Park has some good views, and then so was the one before from, in this case, Glengarry Glen Ross. So it seems like there's a lot of fans of this series too. Anytime that happens, then I'll probably make it a permanent series, and then even then start focusing on your suggestions. But yes, indeed, I'm focusing on this one involving another rich character from, in this case, a Marvel picture that was set on one of the earliest, I guess, entries in the Marvel Universe. I don't even know if you can consider it still the Marvel Universe per se, because it's to this day considered more of a black sheep in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't know why. I love this movie. I loved it when it first came out, and then I saw it a little afterward, and ever since then it still remained pretty favorable in my mind. But it does involve a lot of controversy. A lot of people still consider it to be, in this case, something to be picked on to this very day. But in this case, we're going to talk about this guy, this character from the film, in this case the character known as David Banner, who was, in this case, played by Nick Nolte. And so, as usual with these outside the box videos, I'm going to talk about who he was in terms of his character, what did he do, why did he do it, what would have happened, most importantly, if, in this case, the story deviated and, let's say, things turned more favorable for his character, and then a little bit of trivia there. That's going to be the whole notion. Every time I focus on these outside the box videos, it's about those traits, and then my favorite part is to summary, like in this case, to summarize what would have happened if things changed and the character would have gotten what they wanted. So, but let's go ahead and let's talk about David Banner, in this case from the 2003 Hulk film. So yes, this was and still is a favorite film of mine. I saw this not in theaters, but I saw it when it was released a couple of years afterward on DVD. I just happened to finally get it one of those days. It was on a cheap movie bin box, and when I saw it, I was just slammed by how well this film was made. I loved the way that the film is, it's almost like the most faithful adaptation yet of the Hulk series, because here you have the origin of the Hulk, which follows very closely to what happened to him, the physical characteristics of him, the fact that he has the internal struggle, of course, between himself and the Hulk Beast too. Then you have the amazing fights, in this case, between him and the military, another common trait, of course, within the Hulk comic books. And then it all culminated at the end with, in this case, the big fight between him and his father, in this case, the character we're talking about here, David Banner. But it was an amazing film when I first saw it, and I still watch it periodically to this day. I even have the novelization of it too, because in this case I wanted to further delve into that world, and I'll present some of the key things from there too in this video. And then of course I have the soundtrack as well, besides everything else involving the DVD too. But yes, it's a favorite of mine. I know it's a lot of favorite movie of others out there too. Who knows? Maybe you like it too, or maybe you have a strong opinion against it. Either way, if you wanted to post your comments about your thoughts on the film, that'd be pretty good too. And then also I'll follow up too with some interesting trivia about it afterward. But yes, as far as the David Banner character, who he was, essentially he was the father of Bruce Banner. The reason why it's called David Banner was because it was a throwback to, in this case, the older series. I think it was from the 70s, where the character there was originally going to be called Bruce Banner, of course, in this case the original Hulk, but it was thought that the Bruce name was considered quote-unquote too gay. I'm serious, like that's what it was from the executive. So they thought that they changed it, in this case, to David, to kind of get away from that, and ever since then it's just in that series that's called David Banner, the main character, rather than Bruce Banner. So in this case, this character was a throwback to that series, the name per se, but then also the David Banner character is in the comics. It was a popular run apparently during the 80s, somewhere around there, I think, from Peter David, where he introduced, in this case, the physical trauma that Bruce suffered as a young child from his father. So that was interesting to know too. I had no idea none of this existed before watching this film. So it kind of goes to show you don't have to know all this history when you saw the film. The film just pretty much presented itself quite nicely. But yes, David Banner did come from the comics too, and it kind of harkens to the fact that Bruce, in the comics, of course, has to stay very, very calm, obviously, unless something happens and triggers his Hulk busting out from his skin. So that's why he tries to stay calm, not just because of that, but also because during his younger days, he was experiencing all this trauma from his dad, who had a quick trigger temper, and so he wanted to make sure that he was as quiet and as peaceful as possible. But yes, in the movie, this guy David Banner was a scientist working at an army base. It seemed like it was for the Gamma Project or some kind of atomic project. It never really made it quite clear what it was for, but it allusion to the fact that it had to do with some large bomb of some sort. And whenever he was there, he was able to find out, the effects of what he was working on. Trying to do it on humans was forbidden, in this case from General Ross, who was a younger man in that film too, along with the younger David Banner. And so they kind of butted heads, and then told him that no, he cannot do anything in terms of human subjects. I think I remember him saying it's dangerous and stupid. And so this kind of took this guy a huge affront back from it. And so David Banner decided, well, if he can't test it on humans, he'll test it on himself. And it seemed to work to some effect. But what he did not realize at that time was that his wife later on would become pregnant with his child, in this case Bruce. So because of him being tested on himself, and then the love that they made, passing that stuff from him to his wife, it essentially transferred over to Bruce, and that's how he was born with these effects. So it was a nice little interesting twist to everything within the Hulk mythology, because here you had, in this case, from the very day he was born, he already had something in him in terms of a Hulk-like creature. It finally took, in this case, the accident that that Bruce had, in other words, later on in his adult life, to trigger it, to finally bring out the beast, and that's when the rest of the movie takes place. But in essence, that's the history associated with David Banner. But he eventually just lost control, lost his mind, went insane, because he was eventually going to be fired by this guy Ross. And so because of it, he decided to take out the entire base, triggering the bomb, and then deciding at some point that he created a monster. He wanted to stop this monster, in this case from Bruce, from experiencing anything else. I don't know if he did it essentially out of guilt or out of anger, if there was something else. It seemed like he was trying to prevent kind of knowing what would happen to his son afterward, if it was figured out, what he had within him, what kind of experiments he would go under. I wonder if he realized all of this would befall him, and then realized, this is going to be a very bad way for his son to live his life, so that's why he decided to try to take his life. Either way, though, he was stopped, but in the process, he accidentally murdered his wife whenever she slipped on the same knife that he was going to use on Bruce, and then he was committed, basically taken out, put into an insane asylum for somewhere around, the book mentions, around 30 years or so. So that way he was put away and essentially forgotten. But he himself, of course, had other plans. After he came out from his asylum, in fact, it was mentioned in the novelization that at one point the parole board, everybody that was there, could not find him insane anymore. Like, he was essentially a quote-unquote model citizen. So because of this, he was eventually released. It happens. I mean, whenever these guys, everyone that's in these centers, they go up to these parole boards every couple of years, that parole board has to decide what they're going to do with that person. And if they can't find any more fault, then they release them. Such was the case, in this case, with David Banner. But he eventually went off, and he decided to go ahead and start his experiments one more time, this time though with a twist, trying to see if he could bring out from Bruce whatever was within him, whatever that Hulk-like creature was that he first saw as a very young baby. So quite a twist. In other words, he was no longer really considered insane, but in this case he was much more strategic, much more, in this case, pathological. He was absolutely driven to try to do something with whatever that creature was within Bruce. But in this case, as far as what he did do exactly, he basically, the movie focuses on him a lot. That was an interesting twist too, because obviously, like, Hulk is the big front and center character, so is General Ross, so is Betty, but in this case David actually interacted with all of them. He was able to work with all of them them through bits and pieces of several scenes. So what he did was he eventually just did set a lot of things in motion, hiring himself or finding some way to work within the company that Bruce had, becoming friendly in this case with Betty Ross to try to gain more camaraderie, get closer, in other words, too. Bruce, and at the same time find a weak point with him, and then of course butting heads yet again, in this case with General Ross, who was aware that he was released. The novelization made that aware too, and then the film focused on that too, but in this case not truly aware that what he was doing behind the scenes in terms of his own experiments, how he was bringing all that stuff back up. But he was essentially there throughout the whole movie, like I said, to try to bring out the monster in Bruce. That's why he was in that hospital. That's why he decided to work there as a janitor, because he wanted to stay as close as possible and then see what he could do to try to trigger this creature. And he succeeded. He was able to finally bring out the monster in Bruce through all the machinations that he created, and then it was eventually trigger that scene whenever, in this case, he was able to Hulk out in that place, in that research center, and from then on out, that's when he saw essentially what the beauty of this monster was. By the way, the novelization stated that the reason that he got to work as a janitor in that research center was because he murdered the real janitor that worked there. It was some guy named Benny Goodwin, if I'm not mistaken, and he was working there for a long time. And so David Banner, using his smarts, was able to figure out who the janitor was, visited his home, knocked on it, asked him, "Are you Benny Goodwin?" And then when he said yes, he just plainly murdered him right then and there. And then he took over the guy's house, he took over everything there. That's where he did his experiments. So next time you watch the movie, you'll realize that that house belonged actually to a murdered janitor. And the reason why he did that too, it was quite intelligent of him, was because of this. Nobody really cares who the janitor is in like any building. It's almost like a background character. Nobody will really interact with them. They'll see them, but they won't really question like what they're doing there. So once he was there, he was able to then collect all the samples he needed for his experiments, start working on things behind the scenes. Probably stole a lot of that stuff there too from the research center that he took to Benny Goodwin's home, and that's why he was able to do all of that. But he was able to successfully create, in this case, his Hulk dogs. I know there's a lot of controversy with those Hulk dogs. A lot of people saying that they look stupid or that they just don't work out. I thought they were amazing. I mean, when you had these gigantic pit bull, bulldog, and then a poodle-like dogs, all of them just turned into these massive creatures. When I first saw it there on the DVD, I was like rooting, like saying, yes, like this is the type of action that I'm looking for. And it was amazing whenever he was finally using them to trigger, in this case, the Hulk coming out from Bruce. So, and then as far as why he did all of this, it all has to do with one single purpose. The movie alluded to it just tiny bits, but the novel did a much better job. By the way, the novel, I believe, was done by Peter David, too. So if you haven't had a chance, and if you're a fan of the Hulk 2003 film, check out the novel, too, because obviously Peter David had a huge successful run on the comics. He's also a very, very good writer of novels himself. So if you have a chance, check out that novel, and you'll see all this behind-the-scenes stuff, all this extra trivia stuff that happened. But yes, essentially why he did all this was one word: megalomania. Like when he was imprisoned, and then after those 30 years, and then he finally came out, he essentially wanted his revenge. Like, he was put away for so long, so much of his life gone, that he immediately, as soon as he got out, he just wanted to bring about everything that he could in terms of vengeance towards those that did this to him. Of course, that started first with General Ross. He wanted to make absolutely certain that he would be able to do something about him. But more importantly, he wanted to go out there and then bring back the monster that was within Bruce. So it was dormant for all those years while he was in jail or in the asylum. But now, once he's out, he could trigger him, come out, and then start doing his experiments. But more importantly, he knew that something was within him that caused him to do like something else. Like, in other words, to become something else entirely different. And that ties into his megalomania, because whenever he experimented on himself earlier, all those years before Bruce was born, he too had something within his body that made him get, I don't know, some kind of superhuman powers, but it was too also dormant. So when he realized that seeing the gamma radiation triggered the Hulk to come out of Bruce, he in turn purposely, obviously, like the film shows, triggered it within him. And once he came out, it was that beautiful scene where you saw him like absorbing or starting to absorb the materials surrounding him. Like when he stumbled and he fell onto some steel girder or some steel bar of some sort, his hand turned into that steel as well. Or when he started touching some other artifact and then it became like a, I don't know if it was like a lizard type thing, but he realized that whatever he had within him all those years from before, now with the gamma radiation triggering it from him too, his megalomania can be fulfilled. He had this power within him too. He wanted to absolutely use it to be able to have control over others, to become like something big, something huge, something that he was never allowed to have earlier, being trapped all those years, and then given, I guess, the ridicule that the scorn that he received from General Ross. All of that he wanted to make sure that he would have his revenge on. The movie beautifully portrayed that. Towards the end, there was that famous soliloquy that he did whenever he was there, I guess, in front of Bruce, and they were in between. I don't know if those were like those giant electrical outlets, if you call them those, but they were there stuck between two chairs between them. And then he went on like a huge rant stating that he wanted to end their anthems, their flags, he wanted to end their armies, everything, the control that they had, and then that way he could bring that about, but with the help of the Hulk. That ties in this case to Bruce, because he knew that he could only go so far with his absorbing powers, his newly revealed powers. Instead, he needed Bruce too to be with him, so that way the two of them combined can absolutely take over the world. There's a neat little part in the novel where he's calculating all of this in his head before he meets Bruce in that base, before he goes into that soliloquy with in between those two rockets or whatever those large electrical things were. There he was in a prison one more time, just waiting for that meeting. And then he asked one of the guards there for some pizza, and the guards basically told him, to shut the hell up, something along those lines. And he was thinking to himself in his head, thinking that when he takes over, that guard is going to be one of the first ones to die, like when he takes over the world. And he said, oh yes, like it'll happen soon, very soon. He just has to be a little bit more patient, and then he can do so. That's essentially why he did all of this. This was all tied to megalomania. It could be also tied to insanity. Maybe he was like still insane. Obviously, the parole board thought differently, but maybe to this, once he was released, to that point, to that present day, he reverted back to his insanity. Either way, though, it was all about revenge. It was all about making sure he had power. It was all about absolutely ensuring that he was going to be, I guess you can consider it, top dog within all the world. He wanted to actually control the entire world. So very, very fascinating stuff. In fact, there's going to be another part 2 in the novel that stands out once everything occurs, which ties into this. What would have happened if he had succeeded? This is the fun part. This is the part that I love within all my Outside the Box videos, because I get to focus on this. Obviously, he failed in his quest, trying to absorb Bruce, trying to conquer the whole world from it, use his absorbing powers and the combined powers of Bruce / Hulk to be able to be like the strongest being on the earth, because he didn't take into account the unlimited power that the Hulk had. And he truly has unlimited powers. I remember in one of the comics, there was a Celestial, those gigantic beings that are from eternity, from forever, essentially, that started or tried to measure the strength that the Hulk has, and on it measured as unlimited. So it goes to show that this creature, this Hulk, truly has unlimited strength. That's where he failed. That's where David Banner failed. He failed to take that into consideration, and that's why it overwhelmed him. And that gamma bomb blew him up at that very same time at his weakest point. But let's imagine if he had succeeded. In fact, the novelization kind of went almost in that direction for a brief moment. This wasn't in the film. It was just in a novelization. But when he was absorbing all that power from the Hulk at the end of the novel, at the end of the movie, he was growing larger and larger. But he kept his man-sized shape, like his human-sized shape, is just much, much larger. And the way the novel described it was he grew larger and larger to the point that he towered over the mountains themselves. In fact, I think there was one blurb in there where he was like almost above the clouds as well. Like he was truly gigantic. Like it would have been enormous to have seen him on screen in terms of his size. And when he laughed at all this power, that's when he apparently thundered throughout the entire horizon. Like it was just this gigantic evil laughter, realizing it how much power he had within him. So what would have happened essentially if that bomb would have been fired at him and he simply dodged it? Then he would have lived and he would have succeeded. He would have been able to realize that this creature, this Hulk, truly has unlimited power, and he would have stopped at that point. But then he would have gone on to do something else. So I would imagine it would have gone something like this. He would have found a way to defeat the Hulk, because the Hulk would have been weakened around that point. Remember, after the gamma bomb explosion, where he reverted back to Bruce, so he was at a weakened point somewhere. So this guy, in this case David Banner, he probably would have jumped out, again, dodged the gamma bomb that was on his way, and then used his newfound power to probably just throw up the entire earth around that area. I mean, we're talking about somebody who, for all intents and purposes, was probably the most powerful villain the Marvel Universe had ever encountered. I mean, when you look at other things like the Apocalypse from the X-Men Apocalypse film, or you look at other villains within the films too, some of the other ones that stand out, like Magneto is another one. Another one is I guess none of the Spider-Man ones. This seem to be smaller, but you know what I mean. Like when you talk some of the other larger villains, the more powerful ones, this guy would have been able to absorb anything and been able to survive it, and have been able to throw out as much power as possible too. Like he could have absorbed thunder. He could have absorbed the sky. I'm sorry, the rain itself. He could have absorbed, in this case, the land, a fire, whatever was near him, and he would have become part of that world, and then he would have used it to his advantage. So very interesting stuff. If he would have survived all of this, especially with the Hulk's power within him, there probably would have been nothing that stopped him from reaching his plans of taking over the worlds, of taking over the governments, of throwing them down. All it would have taken was him being like turning into the air or turning into the clouds, and then flying over, in this case, wherever his destination was, and then landing with all the fury and force that he had. Like there probably would have been some scenes straight out of an apocalyptic movie of him just landing in Washington DC and then completely start absorbing everything. Like in this case, all the firepower that's falling on him, it would have been energy that would have been absorbed, and then he probably would have thrown it back. I mean, it would have made for some amazing type stuff. So the fact that he in turn was somebody that was killed in the film was very fortunate, because if he would have succeeded, then he truly, I believe, would have made it towards toppling over all the governments. Would the Hulk have done something afterward? Of course. I mean, it's Marvel, so he would have had something in terms of Bruce / the Hulk fighting him afterward, but he still would have been able to do what he needed to do. I mean, if him as just a regular person caused, in this case, all of the movie stuff to happen, like he caused the original base to be blown up by that giant bomb at the beginning of the movie, then he caused, in this case, the Hulk to be triggered, and then he caused the Hulk dogs to go out and be created, and then have a lot of calamity, and then of course releasing the Hulk, and then finally having all that stuff, and then him in turn being having the power to absorbing all these elements. I mean, this was all before he was even taking on the unlimited power of the Hulk. So afterward, he would have been something to truly consider. It would have been amazing to realize like how much power he would have had, this guy David Banner, if he would have succeeded, and if he reached, in this case, Washington DC or anything else afterwards. So, but that's all the stuff as far as, you know, what could have happened. It's always just out there in terms of a different world, a different universe, in terms of these things playing out. Some other behind-the-scenes trivia associated with this film. Originally, it was supposed to be a set of other creatures instead of the Absorbing Man. It was supposed to be like some I guess you could call it like a insect-like creature, and then it was supposed to be some other rock-like creature. I can't remember what those were, but eventually those were all discarded and it morphed into this. And the reason why Absorbing Man was put into it, I think it was a throwback to some of the comics. In this case, Mr. Zsasz, who played a somewhat small villain within a lot of the Hulk comic books, I think throughout the 60s. But that's why eventually it was changed into the Absorbing Man, was because the Absorbing Man himself is still a somewhat prominent villain, but it was considered that let's make it at least much more personal and have the father try to absorb the Hulk, and then that way it ties into the Absorbing Man. But otherwise, it was supposed to be some of those other villains too. I think there were even plans to have be the leader at one point, which is, if you consider it, the arch villain of the Hulk comic books, but that was thrown out too. And instead, it was just, in this case, the Absorbing Man. I think too that there was a little nod to whatever that the Absorbing Man or David Banner or whatever he was afterward, kind of surviving. Watch the movie again towards the very end, whenever Bruce is in that South African jungle or South American jungle, whatever that is there, and towards the end when he's telling him in Spanish that he wouldn't like him when he's angry, and the camera starts panning upwards, until you hear the distinct Hulk roar announcing his return. Before that happens, you see this like iguana, this chameleon-like creature on top of his hat. That stood out. Like, it seemed like it was there on purpose. Like, why else was it there? I mean, it was put there as a way to draw attention to it. It's bright colors, it's center frame, it's looking straight at the camera as well. I mean, it stood out to me, and I'm wondering if this thing is actually David himself somehow surviving and still limited power, very limited power, but he was able to absorb and become, in this case, this small iguana, so that way he could continue to be with Bruce and be with him, I guess, whenever he decides to go forward with his other plans, whatever those are. Did anybody else get that feeling whenever they first saw the film? I thought so too. I can't believe nobody else has mentioned something like that as far as this creature standing out, being so prominent as the last thing seen in the entire film. I just couldn't think that it could be anything else, because otherwise why would it be there? But if anybody knows if that's done on purpose or if that's something else completely different, then please post those comments below. But that's it. That's pretty much all the info I have here on this newest edition of Outside the Box, in this case from David Banner of the 2003 Hulk film. What do you guys think? Did you like the film too? Did you like the movie afterward, especially after all these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies have come out? Is it the dark horse? Is it the black sheep of the Marvel films now? I still wish there was a lot more love to it in terms of respect. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I still think it's the best iteration of the Hulk films. Not just to mention that, but the fact that it plays like a comic book movie. All those beautiful transitions, those comic book scenes that play out in real life. I thought that was an amazing twist when I was first watching it. I would have hoped there would have been a sequel. In fact, there were plans to do so, which would have brought forth, if I'm not mistaken, the leader. Like, it would have been something like that would have brought him on board. If not him, at least the Abomination. But all of that was discarded once the lukewarm reception was for the film. And then, more importantly, the box office just wasn't setting things on fire. It's one thing if a movie has bad reviews but still makes kick-ass money. I mean, nobody really cares about the reviews afterward. It's all about making the money. But in this case, it failed on both ends. And so that's why, in this case, the movie never got the sequel and everything was just reboot. But at least that's all the information that I have here on David Banner from the film. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.